Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. In our first story, we're going to talk about a situation where someone in charge tells people to do things that are just plain wrong. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you're new here and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new video every single day. Here we go. I just want you to do what I tell you to do. So I did. Background. Just out of high school, years back, I got a job working in the mining industry for a quality testing company. Basically, mining companies would send us samples from their exploration sites, and we'd run tests on it. The process was long and pretty convoluted, and we frequently had tight deadlines and an enormous number of different samples we needed to get done. My first supervisor was exceptional at keeping everything running smoothly, and he knew the ins and outs of every aspect of the workplace. He was also completely devoid of normal communication skills and reduced someone to tears on a weekly basis. But to be honest, I liked him a lot despite that. He was very clear with what he expected, and he was very easy to work for, particularly in comparison to what came after him, a creature that we nicknamed the Lizard. The boss. The Lizard was so named because he was entirely devoid of charisma or any ability to relate to other people. He literally dragged the morale of the workplace to rock bottom within a week of assuming the position. He would spend the entire day in his office refusing to speak with anyone for any reason. He had this nasty habit of dragging things to HR, which were entirely unnecessary and grossly inappropriate. A habit which eventually meant that we had to check to see if he was around before we even spoke to one another, lest he take something out of context. He was unbelievably creepy. In one instance, a coworker was applying sunscreen and the Lizard walked up, commented that it looked like semen, and just walked away. He was condescending to everyone, even though it quickly became apparent that he didn't really understand our work processes. In a particularly cruel mood, he forbade us from using the radio. I know it doesn't sound like a big deal, but you have to understand that this workplace was full of loud industrial equipment, chemical fumes, and coal dust literally everywhere. In the middle of summer, we'd be working in temperatures averaging 33 degrees. This radio was one of the few things to distract you from all of the above. But the worst thing was the simple fact that he couldn't do the job. My job. Projects went missing for days on end, work orders got backed up, paperwork went missing or was incorrectly filled out, samples were mislabeled, all of which was either directly or indirectly caused by the Lizard. The place was kept barely functional by the efforts of a few of the shift leaders and more experienced staff, and this is where I come into the picture. You see, I'd been stuck doing the same job for nearly 2 years by the time the Lizard took charge. I was amazing at it, and I was proud of the work I did. I bent over backwards and worked myself to the bone to keep things running as best I could. I made sure that every other shift had the best idea of what was going on so we could try to keep things moving along. My job involved keeping track of some 15 to 45 samples, all of which were split into 6 to 12 parts while the chemicals we used on them evaporated. This typically meant that I had them spread out all over the place in various states to try and get them to dry faster. I could easily keep track of all of them and tell someone where something is on a moment's notice, provided they follow my one rule: don't touch my crap. One thing gets moved and it screws up my whole groove. The conflict. The Lizard decided that the poor performance was due to us not knowing how to do our jobs, so he decided to take a hands-on approach and micromanage the crap out of us. This meant that he would frequently, and usually while my back was turned and without speaking to me, move things in my section. He would gather all the pieces of the sample he wanted me to do and put it in front of everything else, regardless of if it was wet or not. The chemicals are toxic, it has to dry before I move it on. This alone would have seriously hacked me off, but what was worse was that he was prioritizing the wrong samples. Things that had been stuck up my end for over a month were ignored, and samples he'd rushed through earlier in the week were being prioritized. I had a relationship with our contacts in the office. I knew what needed to be done and what didn't. We all did except for the Lizard, apparently. I tried talking to him about it, but in no less than 9 occasions, he told me to go away because he was busy. I soldiered on and pointedly ignored the samples he was pushing forward. The compliance. Eventually, he got sick of me not doing what he implied he wanted done, and he confronted me about it. The conversation went something like this. Lizard. These samples are important. You need to get them done. If I put a sample in front of you, that means you effing do it. Tyree. I understand that, but a lot of these samples aren't ready to be moved on. They aren't even dry, and we've had those samples from Adani sitting there for 2 weeks and they're due on Friday. I tried to talk to you about this. Lizard. No, listen to me. This isn't difficult. I don't know why you can't just do your job properly like I tell you to. I just want you to do what I tell you to do. Do your effing job. It's not hard. Tyree. All right, I'm sorry. I understand. So I warned the people at the next station that the samples weren't dry, and we sourced breathing equipment for them. I pushed the samples he wanted through and stopped bending over backwards to keep things running. The place predictably became even more of a crap show, and the manager was fired a month later. Within a week of him leaving and my old boss coming back, we were back on schedule. On his way out, he had the gall to ask me, how are you supposed to get anything done when people won't do their effing jobs? That's pretty much how I'd been feeling since he was hired. And our next story. Not my revenge, but my professor against cheaters. I took the final for an engineering class this morning. Usually 1 or 2 people will go to the bathroom during class. However, for totally unknown reasons, about half the class needed to use the restroom during the exam. Obviously, a vast majority of them were looking up the answers on their phones. This irritated me, but I just stayed focused and barely finished since it was a hard exam. I remembered that there was one particular problem that was only barely related to stuff we went over in class, where Part A was fairly easy, but I had no idea how to do Part B. I didn't fret over it too much, though, since that part was only 5 points out of 100. Well, our professor, who's on the older side, and I would have thought was somewhat ignorant of technology, sent us an email now just explaining his diabolical plan to catch cheaters. Many of the students in this class use Chegg, a website that has the answers to lots of homework questions if you're not familiar. To be fair, I have an account too, though I only use it for studying and checking homework solutions. Anyway, he explained that he was tired of people going to the bathroom and looking up answers on their phones, so he made the question I mentioned earlier as a trap. He purposely made Part B impossible to solve, and about a month before the final, he got a TA with a Chegg account to ask the exact question, which was distinctly worded to be unique. He then created his own Chegg account and answered the question with a bullcrap solution that seems right at first, but is actually fundamentally flawed and very unlikely that someone would make the same assumptions and mistakes independently. He said that out of 99 exams, 14 of them fell for the trap, and that everyone who had this wrong solution on their exam was given a 0 and reported to the university for violating the academic honor pledge they signed on the front. He also sent an email to all the other professors in our department, giving them the list of cheaters. Edit. I forgot to mention he gave full credit on Part B of the question to everyone else. Edit 2. Hi guys, I'm writing this 5 months after the initial post. I'm glad this post is getting attention again, and I'm once again receiving messages from people wanting to get in touch with the professor or students from the class. So now that this post has run its initial course, I'll burst everyone's bubble by admitting that I mostly made this story up. It's based on a real incident that happened in my department a couple of years ago, but I wasn't in the class personally. I only heard about it third hand from someone I didn't know that well. So while the general plot and end result of the story is true, I changed some details to keep the professor and school anonymous and took creative liberty in writing from a first-person viewpoint. Unfortunately, the part about my department letting students go to the bathroom during exams with their phones was true and is still true to this day. And to my knowledge, the incident this is based on is the only time that a professor actually took a stand against this crappy policy. So yeah, I don't know the professor personally since the class he taught was not part of my program's curriculum, so I won't put anyone in touch with him or anyone else who knows about the real incident and could expose his identity. Before anyone reports this for being fake, I'll once again stress that while I changed the details, the actual events played out in a similar way, and the real professor did in fact get his revenge on the cheaters. And our last story. Sometimes I hate customers. I own my own business, Party Rentals. I specialized in inflatable bounce houses. We had almost 40 variations. It was good work, but dealing with people became a chore after a bit. I received a call from a woman who wanted Winnie the Pooh for an all-day party. It was a cheap knockoff of the real thing. I quoted her a price of $150 for an all-day party, She informed me that my competition was renting them for $75 all day. I bid her farewell and hung up. About 2 hours later, she calls me back with some nonsense about how the other guy never showed up. I was fully deployed at that point and wouldn't be making any pickups till later on that evening. I told her I'd be there in 30 minutes. I showed up at the house. I'm rolling out the bouncer. The lady comes out and starts nagging me about the poor quality. She then informs me that she's only paying me $100 because I'm 3 hours late. I got fed up and started rolling up my bounce house. Her husband came out and apologized. I told him too bad too. I was worried about coming back to pick up a damaged bouncer. I was over it. He offered me $200. I started to leave. The wife comes back out with her cordless phone in hand and demands the number to speak with my supervisor. I gave her the number like she asked. She dialed the number. My cell phone started to ring. When I answered the phone, I looked right at her and said, F you. That's somebody you don't want as a customer. They probably would have left a bad review on you in various social sites as well by now, saying all sorts of things. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.